That's right, folks, you read that right. The M2 Pro Mac Mini is faster than the M1 Max Mac Studio. Let me show you straight away a leaked benchmark that has come in showing us that the Mac Mini M2 Pro has a higher single-core and multi-core score than the M1 Max Mac Studio. Take a look here. So as you can see here, for the score for the Apple M2 Pro, the single core score comes out at 1,952 with the multi-core score coming out at 15,013. Now, let me show you the M1 Max in the Mac Studio. Here we've got the single core score of 1,756, so that's around about 200 less, and then we've got the multi-core score at 12,336, so again that is about 3,000 less, what is absolutely unbelievable. However, are we surprised by this result? Well, what I mean by this is let me show you the scores on Geekbench 5 of all of the scores of the M1 Pro and the M1 Max. If we first look here at the single core score, we can actually see from all the way from the M1 all the way up to the M1 Max that the single core score is exactly the same. It doesn't change at all. And the main reason behind this is Apple even confirmed that basically the M1 Pro and also the M1 Max was using the same efficiency cores and also the performance cores as what was inside the normal M1 chipset, except for there were just more of them. So as you can see here, there are slight marginal improvements by tiny little numbers, nothing that you would actually see in sort of daily working or sort of video processing or photo editing or anything like that. But basically all the cores were exactly the same, and that's why the score is basically, again, exactly the same. In fact, check it out with the M2 to the M2 Pro. If we look at the score here, the M2 inside, for example, the MacBook Pro 13-inch is 1,900. Then if I flip back to that M2 Pro leak that we've just come in, you can see that the score is 1,952. And also on top of that, I'm also going to say that most likely the M2 Max is probably going to have a score probably about 1,960 something or 1,970 something. It won't be a lot more because again, the single core sort of structure, the cores, how they're made, they're all exactly the same across the line. But next, let's talk about the multi-core score, because at the end of the day, this is what most of you are probably wondering, what is the speed difference between the M2 Pro and the M1 Max? Well, if we look here at the scores of what we've got here for the M1 Pro and also the M1 Max in multi-core score, you can actually see they're basically identical, all the way from the 14-inch MacBook Pro all the way up to the M1 Max Mac Studio, the most beefiest sort of M1 Max chipset we can get on the market right now. Again, the multi-core score is exactly the same. And you're probably wondering, why is this the case? Well, to be honest, apart from the binned M2 Pro chipset, what I'll talk a little bit about in a minute, I'm talking about the normal M2 chipset. This is the one with the 12 cores, and also inside that has the 4 efficiency cores and then has the 8 performance cores. If we look at the M2 Max, you'll actually see that the chips are exactly the same. In fact, even in the presentation, Apple didn't actually go into more details about the sort of 12 core setup on the M2 Max because basically they said it is exactly the same. So really, in the grand scheme of things, the M2 Pro and the M2 Max in CPU cores is exactly the same. So by that, we're not actually really that surprised that the M2 Pro in CPU performance in multi-score can actually probably beat an M1 Max. Because at the end of the day, as I've just shown you there, the M2 Pro and the M2 Max have the exact same amount of cores, just like the M1 Pro and the M1 Max had exactly the same amount of CPU cores, except for the binned version of the M1 Pro. So really, there is no surprise that the M2 Pro can beat the M1 Max. But let me next of all talk about the binned version of the M2 Pro. So most likely the score of this, even though we haven't had an official report at the time of making this video, it will be less than that Geekbench score that you just saw there. In fact, if you look here at the M1 Pro binned version to the normal M1 Pro that came out in the 14-inch MacBook Pros, you can see in multi-core score it is far less. Obviously for single core score, it will be exactly the same as we've talked about already. So the first thing to take away here is that the M2 Pro is faster than the M1 Max. But the M2 Max is going to be about the same sort of speed as the M2 Pro, the non-bin version, when it comes out in just CPU power. However, where the big difference will be in GPU cores. With the M2 Pro being able to have up to 19 GPU cores, and for the M2 Max able to have up to 38 cores, that is where the big difference is going to be. Also the fact that the M2 Max also has 2 video encoders and decoders, whereas the M2 Pro only has 1. This is where there will be big differences. So if you are highly graphical dependent, or if you are going to be doing really extreme sort of photo editing, you're beyond the sort of an amateur, let's say you're a wedding photographer or wedding video person, I can't think of the right word there, but you get the idea. If you're one of those sort of people, then definitely the M2 Max is going to be more beneficial for you. But where the big difference is going to be in GPU cores. With the M2 Pro right now, you can get up to 19 GPU cores, what is far more than what we had on the M1 Pro, what allowed us up to 16 GPU cores. And also that's the same for the M2 Max. We can get up to 38 GPU cores, where we actually had up to 32 before on the original M1 Max. And I would definitely say that if you're looking for more graphical power, you will definitely want to be opting to getting yourself an M2 Max. Because not only does it have those extra sort of graphical cores, you also have an extra video decoder and encoder. That's right, the M2 Pro has 1 video encoder and 1 decoder, whereas the M2 Max actually has 2 of each, what is really, really impressive. So what I would say is, if you're a person who's completely dependent on CPU power in the sort of applications that you are using, and you don't really need to use too much graphics, but you need more of those sort of CPU cores, I would definitely be opting to get yourself an M2 Pro. There's no point getting yourself an M2 Max because you'll never use those extra cores inside there, and also that extra video encoder and decoder. And also remember though guys, if you are somebody who does the high-end graphics of creativity, and you are a person who does full-on video editing all the time, like a YouTuber for example, and you're making videos quite daily at high quality, then yeah, the M2 Max is definitely going to be the great sort of choice for you right now. And with that guys, I think we can conclude that the M2 Pro and the M2 Max in CPU speed is going to be exactly the same, and most likely in the next generation of M3, the M3 Pro and also the M3 Max in CPU cores is also going to be the same, because this looks like what Apple are going to be doing in the future, because they've done it on this generation and they also did it on the last generation with the M1 Pro and the M1 Max. So then guys, on that note, what are your thoughts? Are you surprised that the M2 Pro CPU cores are faster than the M1 Max? Or were you expecting it? I would love to know your thoughts down in the comments below. And also guys, if you want to hear the latest Apple news, reviews and comparisons, please also make sure you subscribe to this channel and also hit that notification bell. Until next time guys, I will see you really soon. Take care. Bye bye.